Now we'd like to ask Professor Jim Morris from Carnegie Mellon to come up and moderate a panel on entrepreneurship and what's place got to do with it. Yep.
Place got to do with it.
So I see all my friends out there. Please prepare your questions. Don't make me we actually have a new addition to the panel. This is Ruchi Sangvi, Charlie Cheever, Clara Sieg, Mike Kazar, who's a new introduction, and Louis Van On. So you see what their backgrounds are. Mike is a serial entrepreneur who has done all of his startups in Pittsburgh. He's currently the CTO of Avere Corporation. Okay, we don't have a lot of time, so I would just like each of these people has done multiple startups and things. I'd like each of you to tell me kind of what was the biggest change you made, or when you were on your entrepreneurial path, when did you decide to start it, or when was the biggest change of direction, or when did something not work out and you decided to do something else? So we'll start with Louis.
I was hoping you'd start with somebody else. The biggest change, so what is the biggest pivot we've made?
Yes.
Well, so let's see. I'm the CEO of Duolingo, which is my second startup. Depending on how you count, it could be my third startup. And I guess probably the biggest change we've made, we actually completely pivoted our business model for Duolingo. We thought we could make money in a given way. It turns out we really couldn't make money that way. So now we're trying other schemes to make money.
Okay. Let me pick some people. Charlie Cheever, when did you decide to get into computing?
I decided to get into computing just when I was a kid, and my dad took me to the public library, and there was a book that said like how to make computer games, and I took it out and said you need to know how to program in BASIC to use this book. So I think one thing that's interesting about me, I think, is neither of my parents knows anything about technology, really. Sorry. So that, like, just having like the public library was a big resource. And then we grew up in Point Breeze and Shadyside, and so actually in middle school and high school, I actually went to computer camp at Duquesne University. They had a computer academy, and then there's a program called Andrews Leap at Carnegie Mellon. That was really a big influence and basically made me decide to do computer science in college.
Okay, great. Ruchi, you've done a number of startups in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is in trouble for not having enough women. So is Pittsburgh, by the way. So how would you advise a corporation or a city or anyone to make it easier for women?
I think it starts really young. I think it starts when children are in preschool and middle school and primary school to encourage your girls to want to study science and technology. If you think about it, like, you know, girls in their early ages get toys like dolls, and boys get toys like cars and Legos and things where you can break things apart and rebuild them. And I think it's a shame. I think girls should get interesting toys like circuits and Legos that they can break apart and put together and get interested in technology itself. And then I also think that when women reach college, they are at a disadvantage. So for example, unlike Charlie, I didn't actually even touch computers or write a program up until high school. And the first time I wrote my program was my first year in Carnegie Mellon University. So we are at a disadvantage, and that lack of confidence makes it really difficult for us to keep up and stay in the field. So I think doing more things to encourage girls to continue studying STEM during college is pretty important as well. And then for companies, I think building an environment and providing mentorship is very important, but I think the best way to bridge the gap is to actually recruit women from college itself. It's going to be really hard to convince women to leave securities of their jobs, companies that they're familiar with, and there aren't that many to start off with. So the best source for recruiting women is actually universities.
Okay. Clara, so you're the finance person on on this? Did you start a business, or did you go directly into finance and investing? How did it work?
I started out in investment banking, and then a handful of us left to do our own restructuring firm, which was sort of a disaster. And then I started working for Steve Case, who founded AOL back in 2010, and we institutionalized around the family office. We've raised about $1.5 billion, and we invest across the life cycles of companies. I focus on all Series A and B opportunities, and we have a later stage fund that does growth stage investing.
Okay. Mike, so what's been your most interesting entrepreneurial experience?
Probably the change of direction that Spinnaker Networks had. We started off building a giant pile of hardware to address file storage, and discovered it wasn't going to, the box was really way out of control in complexity, and we decided to move to a commodity platform. And negotiating that sort of change in direction while VCs are breathing down your neck, wondering whether they're looking at a catastrophe or not, was interesting. Anyway.
Okay. Maybe we have some budding entrepreneurs in the audience, or some former entrepreneurs. Ask away.
Okay, I'm going to ask the first question.
All right, pick a person, make them answer it.
And this question is actually for Louis. So Louis was courted by every single company out there and many different universities. My question is, why did you choose to stay in Pittsburgh and do both, and his startups are extremely successful, and do both these startups here in Pittsburgh?
Have you ever been to Primanti's?
Well, there are many Primanti brothers around the country.
I'm kidding. It's mainly for Carnegie Mellon. I mean, I really like Carnegie Mellon, and I am also, I'm not on leave, but I'm a professor there, and I think that's been a huge source of talent for my companies, and I think that's been it. I think now, I'm very happy that we've stayed in Pittsburgh. Now with Duolingo, we're running into the problem that we're, hiring engineers has been not easy, but at least we've been able to hire engineers. But the harder part that we're having, the problem we're having now is hiring experienced people in marketing or sales that have previous startup experience. That seems pretty hard here. I did not realize that before starting Duolingo, but I like the city, and I got here 15 years ago, and there's now like more than one Ethiopian restaurant, which is pretty awesome, and more Primanti's branches.
So I don't know how many of you run a team or have in the past, probably all. I'm Emily Plozek from Mike Pittsburgh, that music company I mentioned earlier. So I have a team of interns from Pitt, actually, and another team of freelancers. And they're all very on board at all moments with what I'm doing, because I really care about transparency and everything we're doing across every department. But one problem I find when it comes to like keeping them motivated, aside from just keeping them like informed, is that, you know, things like having a weekly meeting, doing kind of team building activities, sometimes it's not enough. So if you have any comments at all about how to keep people responsive, I write a Monday morning update every week. Sometimes people just ignore it. Anything at all about this human element would be helpful, because you're all entrepreneurs.
I could take a crack. I think having the right tools for the right people is really important. So if email feels really heavy and people aren't engaged in it, having more conversational tools like maybe Slack is something that people might want to respond to. And then including things that are interesting. So for example, I have a similar problem because I've just started this new community called South Park Commons, and there is no reason for people to invest their time and energy in the beginning because it's a learning community. And one of the things that I've done is that every time people walk in and out of the office, I have this thing that announces it to everybody else in the group. It's like a beacon, and it says, Ethan just walked in at like 2:52 p.m. on a Saturday, and then suddenly like I see this like pile up of activity around that, and 3 or 4 people start walking in because of that. So I think encouraging those kinds of network-based things and automated stuff gets people excited and wanting to participate. More fun team-building activities. We just did this activity where we tried to escape from the room, and we were locked in the room for 1 hour, and we had to solve puzzles. And that broke some of the barriers down. And we just talked about it for an entire week afterwards. So things like that definitely help.
So any more ideas other than founder stock? How do you get people going? Do you have interns working for you?
I think sometimes maybe engaging a group like from 0 to 12 people all at once is sometimes hard, but maybe if you start with like one-on-one communications and then pull them all together. Sometimes, like if you were going to have a birthday party or something, sometimes you like ask the person's best friends to make sure that that date works, and then you like grow it out from there. But then once you sort of build that base, then you can all sort of agree to like put the energy in at 8 p.m. on Saturday night or whatever. So if you are having trouble like getting energy around a weekly Monday morning meeting or something like that, maybe just like call up the 3 most engaged people and make sure they're all on the same page, and then, get them to like call the next people, and so that you have this sort of tree of energy.
I think Charlie's point is really good in that managers often think they have to do everything themselves, and they have to activate the entire group themselves. So one of the things that I learned in my community is when I appointed 3 people, one responsible for culture and the other one responsible for events, suddenly engagement doubled and tripled because there were more people invested. So even small things like the Monday morning meetings, if you actually make someone else accountable for it, instead of doing it all yourself, I think that's pretty effective as well.
I have
Great.
a question, which is from Clara, Charlie, and Ruchi. You have connections to Pittsburgh, but you're not here now. So what advice do you have for all of us Pittsburghers to make ourselves a great place? And how do we grow our tech hub here?
I think the early seeds of what you guys have is really compelling. I think when we focus on investing outside of the Valley, and we don't have any portfolio companies here now, but we do spend quite a bit of time here looking for opportunities. You have Carnegie, Mellon, and Pitt, which provide a lot of engineering talent. You have bigger legacy industries. Healthcare is a big one here with UPMC that retains talent. And then you have the early startings of a really encouraging seed funding community and incubators around that. I think part of what needs to happen is attracting later stage capital. We talked about this a bit last night, and it's been echoed here a lot, but getting to Pittsburgh is non-trivial. And if you have an opportunity in your backyard that is easy to work with versus something that requires getting on multiple planes and going through a lot of connections, it's often a barrier to entry. And then I think a piece of it is, and that's starting to be addressed with the addition of Google and Facebook and Uber having campuses here. Part of the reason that the Valley has worked so well is because early stage companies can plug into much bigger corporations and structure partnerships that really elevate the status of their companies. And that's beginning to happen here, but it hasn't really come through full cycle.
Yeah. So just thinking about this from the perspective of like what would be important to me to build my own business here. I think there are a lot of great things about Pittsburgh, and I would also echo everything that Paul Graham said earlier. But 2 things that I don't think anyone's mentioned yet are, I feel like there's been a lot of focus on CMU that people have been talked about all today. But part of what I think was important in all the places that I've lived, like Silicon Valley and Boston and Seattle, was that there was just like a lot of people, and there's sort of a numbers game. And so I think to really build like a good core of stuff, if Pitt started producing a lot of people who were CS majors and also just people who went into the startup business doing things like marketing and things like that, that would just really be a big boon, because I think relying on like one institution that has classes that are so big to do that is probably not enough. And so I think it would really help the region become more of like a place where you could do entrepreneurship if Pitt, which is a much bigger school was doing that. And then the other thing is, people say like that an important thing about Silicon Valley culture is that it's okay to fail. I don't actually think that that's true. Like, I think it's really embarrassing and horrible if you fail. But I think what
That's
is
because
true,
you're a Pittsburgher.
yeah. But I think like it's actually there's much softer landings in Silicon Valley, because if you do something and you're smart and you work hard and you're able to like do something reasonable and do an impressive job with it and attract other good people, there's a bunch of big companies. There's Google, there's Facebook, there's Oracle, there's Yahoo, there's Uber, there's like I can't even name them all, but there's so many different ways that you can like, you know, exit your company and basically get all your investors' money back, get your employees a good exit so they can buy a house and take care of their family or whatever they want to do. Whereas I think it's a little bit scary to go outside of that and end up in a place where you feel like, oh, if this doesn't work, then like I don't know what I'm going to do. And I think so. It's really exciting to see, you know, Apple and Uber and Oculus and Google and stuff like having offices here, and just also companies like Duolingo growing bigger, so that they might be a place where, hey, if it doesn't work out, then, you know, I can go get a job there, or, you know, I'm not going to be, you know, destitute or, you know, humiliated.
Yeah, I want to second that. I mean, the first startup I worked on started in 1989, and that was a big problem, right? We'd have people come here and say, well, what happens if Transert goes under? And the answer was, well, maybe there's some research job at CMU, but that was pretty much it. And all the companies you've named now really has made a huge difference in terms of how attractive Pittsburgh is and how easy it is to bring people here. And so I think that's been, over the last 25 years at least, a huge improvement in Pittsburgh. And I also want to say, I think the University of Pittsburgh has produced a lot of very good people. It's not just CMU. We've hired a lot of people over the course of the startups I've been at from Pitt who've been excellent.
Yeah, so you two guys, is there a question out there?
Yeah.
Yes.
I arrived here at 25 years old in 1983 at the worst possible moment. Got a chance to build off of Carnegie Mellon's strength of the Software Engineering Institute as a young architect. What I'm interested now as I turn 60 is that spirit of entrepreneurship gets transferred to older generations, that there's an exchange of generational learning and entrepreneurship. I'd like to see more people my age starting up a firm. As an architect, I do that every day with every new project, but I think maybe there's an opportunity here that we're not just focused on that 25 to whatever that number was, but also there were some studies done called Boomers in the Berg that looked at the asset that we provide in terms of our knowledge and experience back to the new generation. Any comments on that as folks that are just starting out or have gone through a couple of iterations of these companies?
I think it's a pretty good source of talent. We started actually hiring recently people from NetApp who are, you know, usually older than 40, and they are. It's pretty awesome to have them around because they know all kinds of things that none of us know, and it's great. I mean, I think it's a great source of talent. NetApp in particular the company doesn't seem to be doing great, which is great for me.
Hey, I'm looking for a job too, by the way.
We can talk.
Yes.
So I appreciate the comment about gray hair. I'm a former entrepreneur. I'm at CMU, and I'm looking for some advice both for CMU and Pitt. Paul Graham, I think, got the widest range of reaction earlier when he said that universities should do exactly nothing to help things flourish. He was talking about innovation, entrepreneurship centers, and so forth. I'm wondering what you guys think about that.
I think that he didn't exactly say that, and I think that he sort of said one thing that was really important was to give people space. And I know that, like, I went to Harvard, which is a little bit different than CMU, but since I grew up right near the campus, and I know a bunch of my high school classmates went to CMU, and it feels like people work really, really hard at CMU, and they get really, really good at what they do, but they also are spending, you know, 98% of their time just like doing this really hard work. And I think one thing that was really nice about Harvard is that since it has such a big brand, there was this sense that, like, oh, if you go here, then like people will just assume you're smart for the rest of your life, whether you do any work or whether you are or not. And it's not fair. But it did mean that, like, a lot of people felt like they could go pursue, other projects and just do whatever they felt like was the most important thing for them to be doing without worrying, like, am I gonna pass this class that's really hard and that's taking 80 hours a week? And so I think, like, I think it's actually important for CMU to be, like, what it is, because that's part of its DNA and it's, like, part of what makes it great. So I don't have any prescription for it, but I do think that, like, what would be cool is just maybe if there was a way to get some, like, space for people who have that inclination.
Yeah, that's something I noticed when I was a grad student here, is how much harder people worked at CMU, even sometimes on crap work, right? Compared to, I was an undergrad at MIT, and like to be a math major, I had to take 8 classes, 6 of which had to be hard. And that was it. That plus, a certain number of units, and then I could go off and, I learned far more in a term time job than I did actually through any of the computer science courses. And I think the idea of sort of backing off, giving people a little time to explore is actually a really good idea.
Okay, so
I think the university can do a lot of things that, in fact, is currently not doing. And I can say that because I kind of work there too. But for example, hiring, I think that's something that the university is doing something, I think, really bad for startups, but really good for corporations, which is they're trying to make it so that people have jobs earlier and earlier. And for example, right now, the job fair is like in first day of September every year. And if you're a startup and you're trying to hire somebody fresh out of Carnegie Mellon, to hire them to start in June, you have to go recruit them in August. And if you're a startup, this is just not viable, whereas for a large corporation, it is. And there's just little things like that I think are just ingrained in the DNA of Carnegie Mellon that is mostly about sending people, at least in the computer science program, the whole DNA is, it used to be sending people to Microsoft, now it's, then sending people to Google, then to Facebook, now it's probably, it's moved on to like Dropbox or Uber or whatever it is now, but it's basically sending people to the next big, large company. And I think that that's something that the university could change. But I think there's a lot, and in fact, if you look at a lot of the startups here, their employees, a lot come from, well, either Pitt or CMU or other companies here. So certainly that's the talent pool. So I think the university could do a lot.
Okay. Yes.
So I'm wondering, for those of you who started your own business, how long did it take you from having an idea of what you want to do to actually start it to build your own company?
I did start a startup. It was called Cove, but that transition period between having the idea and settling on the idea and then recruiting the first couple of people took a year. But it takes a lot longer to get any traction for the company. So to have a product that feels finished enough, to have users using it, to see some sort of engagement and growth on the product. That could take anywhere from 2 to 3 to even 4 years. And a lot of the companies that you hear about did actually take that long. So for example, something like Instagram, they had like multiple attempts, and it took them like 3 years before they hit upon Instagram and became what it is today. Something like Pinterest I think they took nearly 4 to 5 years to get to that point. So I think it differs. Facebook was a different story. Like they saw that traction within the first 1.5 years. But every company is different, and it can take an extremely long time. So I would say as a startup founder, the only thing that matters is perseverance.
Yeah, I'd say it took between 3 and 6 months for the second and third companies I was involved in to actually get it off the ground. But again, it takes a long time then to build a product and then to refine it. And in one of those companies, we had to do a reset about 1.5 years in when it was apparent that our whole business model was wrong. The first one was sort of a spin-off from Carnegie Mellon that involved IBM deciding how it wanted to do something. And so that probably took close to 1 year of IBM trying to figure out what they wanted to do. So that was sort of a one-off.
Jim, I have a comment. It's Jane for Louis. Louis, I'm a user of Duolingo, and I just love it. It's so much fun. And when I tell my friends that Duolingo was created and is headquartered in Pittsburgh, they can't believe it. And I think it's so great that you've created something that helps Americans learn other languages. And I think for that to be in Pittsburgh says something great about this city too, that it sort of makes us look good just to have you here. So it pains me to hear that you're having trouble getting this to the next level, and I really hope you figure it out, because I think it's just a great idea and something that is really, really great for our city. So I hope it works.
Thank you.
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up on something Charlie said, and in response to one of the questioners and the reference back to Paul Graham's talk, is that, I think there's a natural tension, but, typically entrepreneurs and startups are risk takers, and typically universities, especially large, and I think more probably public universities as opposed to private that are a little bit more nimble, have traditionally been more risk averse. I will say at Pitt, we have recognized that. We have a new chancellor who came in and recognized that very quickly, and we've been very committed. I think CMU was ahead of the University of Pittsburgh in terms of the student startup effort, but we've really ramped up at Pitt. A couple weeks ago, I attended the final event for the Randall Big Idea competition, and although it's open, it was full of Pitt undergrads and graduate students. So I really do think that there is a momentum forming, and as you said, Pitt has those numbers. But I would also say that doesn't happen by accident, and even though some may not like the labels, you have to encourage that culture, and we've begun and really ramped up the investment in developing the entrepreneurial spirit within our students as well as our faculty. So you have to have some mechanisms in place, and I think to have students think that way, and then to help them along, to mentor them and provide the guidance that they need to get where they want to go.
Okay. Yep.
Hi. So I'm an undergraduate at Carnegie Mellon University and currently working on an education technology startup. I just want some advice or candid feedback in terms of, I definitely agree with what you all said about CMU. Basically, it's all about the work, and people just put so much time in the work. And it's something we've been talking a lot about. But then, when it comes down to it, it's hard to work on a startup as well as take classes at CMU and get your degree. What advice would you have in terms of the importance of the degree and also taking the classes versus let's say that you get some traction in the startup, then moving forward next semester or after that?
I think one of the things you're gonna have to do is just pick what you don't care about. One of my friends, who's probably one of the most successful entrepreneurs I know, I worked on the college newspaper with him, and he was a great managing editor of the newspaper, and he failed out of school and had to take a semester off. He eventually got his degree, but he basically just chose to go really deep into working on the newspaper and doing an amazing job at that. And he was learning stuff in his classes that he was going to when he was going to them and stuff, and he's super smart. But he just decided that it was more important to do a good job on the newspaper. And I think it's really hard to start a business, really hard to learn a whole subject really well when you're competing with other people that are really, really smart and really hardworking as well. And so you're probably just gonna have to make tough choices. I would say I don't think degrees are super important, and it's just really important to learn important stuff from your classes. That's my own personal view, but I think degrees are just not that important if you actually know your stuff.
Just get rich and forget the tuition, get rich, give us the money.
Sounds good. Thank you.
More questions. So you two guys at the end, so you've got companies, and your exit could be somebody wants to acquire you, and when they say, we're going to acquire you, and we want you to move to some unnamed place, how will you deal with it?
Well, that hasn't happened to me, and
What about NetApp?
oh, they didn't ask me to move. NetApp acquired the company, as did IBM acquire Transarc. I've never been asked to move. At this point, I probably wouldn't do it. You know, in that I'm just old enough that I just don't think I'd schlep across the country just for fun. But a lot depends on the specifics too, right? If the job's interesting enough and my wife can find something that she wants to do there, that's a lot different than not.
In our case, I think it would be hard. I mean, we're getting close to 80 people now, and I think it'd be hard to move 80 people. An acquirer that would ask us to move probably doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Jim, I just worked with a company that got sold to a Bay Area company, an internet company, and the buyer thought that they were going to shut down here in Pittsburgh, move the people that they wanted, particularly engineers, out to Silicon Valley. And then after the sale closed, the buyer sent a team here and saw how good the people were here and how well they worked together, and decided to actually continue the unit here in Pittsburgh rather than moving people out to Silicon Valley. So that's an unusual situation. Often buyers do want to consolidate people and want to move people to their headquarters. But I think increasingly today, there are a lot of companies with offices in many places, even young companies often have offices in many places. It's easier to collaborate with the technology that's available today. So I think that's happening less than it used to. I do think there are a lot of startups, though, whose funders want them to be closer to where the funders are, and I see a lot of pressure on that.
Okay, one more question at most. Yes.
I have a practical question. I'm a founder of a robotics company in Pittsburgh, and we are in a rapid growth phase, and we're trying to hire engineers, and invariably the applicants that apply are 90+% men, and I would really like some practical advice on how to reach out to women engineers as a Pittsburgh company.
So one thing that has worked out for us, so there's Carnegie Mellon has a few groups. There's one called Women at SES, Women in Computer Science. Sponsoring their events is pretty good. I mean, we've gotten maybe 2 or 3 hires from just, well, I don't know if they came specifically from sponsoring their events, but I think they heard about us that way, and I think you start a relationship that way. So I think reaching out to them early while they're still in the university makes sense. But I agree. I mean, we have the same problem. 90% of our applicants, I don't know what percentage, but an overwhelming majority of our applicants are male. But we try to do what we can. We have.
Especially for more experienced engineers, how can you get people who come from?
Yeah, you can recruit. Google has a bunch of good female engineers, so you could recruit from there.
All right. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you very much.